There's an assumption that being wealthy means spending freely on whatever you want. Look at how actual wealthy people manage money day to day, and that falls apart. They follow a very specific rule. They let other people absorb the most predictable financial losses in the economy rather than absorbing those losses themselves. This diagram illustrates the difference in how two specific mindsets process a purchase. On the left, we have the income spender. They optimize for how a purchase makes them look or feel right now. On the right is the wealth preserver. They optimize for value per dollar, every single time, regardless of how small the decision is. Transforming into a wealth preserver requires mathematically stripping the premium for a feeling out of everyday purchases, starting with the largest predictable loss. This graph tracks a typical new vehicle. According to Kelley Blue Book, a $40,000 car loses roughly 20% of its value, $8,000, in the first 12 months. Buying a brand new car is like being the first person to jump into a pool to check the water temperature. Someone has to do it, and whoever does pays the real cost of that discovery. The car is now considered used. Look at how that plays out over 5 years. The original buyer, owner A, absorbs roughly $22,000 of total depreciation on that single vehicle. Now look at owner B, who steps onto the exact same timeline at the 2-year mark. The steepest part of the curve has already happened. Holding it for the remaining 3 years, owner B experiences a much gentler decline, absorbing only $8,000 of depreciation. Same car, wildly different financial outcomes. If you are thinking this means leasing is the smarter move because you never hold the car through its worst years, we need to look at how a lease is actually calculated. This chart breaks down a standard lease payment. The dealer calculates the exact depreciation the vehicle is expected to experience during your term and bundles it together with their profit margin plus finance charges. You are not avoiding the depreciation cost, you are prepaying it. At the end of a lease, you owe nothing, and the dealer keeps the margin. Buying a brand new car or leasing one results in a massive, quantifiable premium paid for the fleeting feeling of being first. Let's apply this to conditional risks. Look at this grid of 100 televisions. Researchers publishing in the Review of Economic Studies analyzed 45,000 real electronics purchases. They found the real-world failure rate for televisions was between 5 and 8%. But consumer psychology breaks the math. When offered an extended warranty, customers behaved as if the real failure rate was 13%. People systematically overestimate how likely their item is to break, because a potential loss feels much more intense than an equivalent potential gain. Retailers know exactly how to price that inflated fear. Based on the actual failure rates, researchers calculated extended warranty profit margins as high as 62 to 73%. For every dollar spent, 73 cents is pure profit for the seller. A wealthy person self-insures small and moderate risks. If a $600 laptop breaks 2 years from now, someone with a basic emergency fund replaces it out of pocket. They keep the 70% markup that would have gone toward an unused premium. You only need insurance for losses you genuinely cannot absorb. This same refusal to pay for a feeling applies to a standard $150 weekly routine, the grocery store. Extended warranties on consumer electronics function as a wealth transfer from the buyer's loss aversion to the retailer's bottom line. Store-brand groceries cost an average of 40% less, yet are frequently manufactured in the exact same factories, on the exact same production lines as their name-brand counterparts. This schematic explains why you keep buying the more expensive version. Manufacturers pay grocery chains what are known as slotting fees. This is a hidden payment made specifically to secure that glowing red zone, premium, eye-level shelf space directly in a shopper's line of sight. The store controls its own private label products, so they don't pay that fee. The shopping environment is deliberately arranged so the heavily marketed option hits your eyes first. The functionally identical, 40% cheaper product sits one shelf down, requiring a deliberate act of looking to even notice it is there. Defaulting to a name brand out of habit adds a 40% architectural tax to the receipt for the presence of a recognizable logo. The feeling of newness on a car lot, the feeling of safety at the electronics checkout, the feeling of familiarity in the grocery aisle. In every case, these feelings represent expensive illusions. Wealthy people are consistent about asking one specific question before money leaves their account. Am I paying for the function of this thing or the feeling attached to it? Standard budgeting advice asks you to restrict the total amount flowing out of your account. The wealth preservation mindset sharpens the lens you apply to whatever budget you already have, maximizing the utility of every individual dollar. Eliminating these emotional premiums is the fastest way to redirect wasted capital into compounding net worth. This mindset is tested most as your salary grows.
Consumers regularly pay a massive premium at the pharmacy counter, purely for a change in packaging. If you look at the actual FDA data, you realize that choosing the name printed on a bottle often costs thousands of dollars for the exact same chemistry. The FDA's own published numbers show that the average generic medication costs 80 to 85% less than its brand name equivalent. For a product legally required to deliver the exact same active ingredient into your bloodstream, most consumers are paying a massive markup out of pocket. In some documented cases, the price gap is even wider. When a generic competitor finally entered the market for one specific psychiatric medication, the cost dropped from roughly $43 a tablet down to about 80 cents within a year. That is a decline of more than 98% for the identical chemical compound at the identical dose. Looking at this chart, you can see how this math plays out for someone treating a chronic condition. If a brand name prescription runs $200 a month and the generic is $40, that gap sweeps across a 10-year timeline to create a $20,000 difference. That money is lost simply because a patient either did or didn't ask their pharmacist if a generic was available. This graph tracks exactly why that generic is safe to take. The FDA uses a strict standard called bioequivalent. To get approved, the generic version has to trace the original drug's performance within a tight, pre-specified 80 to 125% variance band. You might look at that variance band and wonder why there is a range at all. As the visual splits into two distinct colors, you can see that the allowed generic variance perfectly matches the brand name batch variance. That range simply reflects the natural statistical variation you would see between two different bottles of the exact same brand name drug manufactured on different days. Physicians do flag a narrow exception for a small category known as narrow therapeutic index drugs, like certain highly sensitive anti-epileptics, where even tiny fluctuations in blood concentration dictate staying with one specific manufacturer. But for the overwhelming majority of prescriptions filled, the underlying science is settled. The gap between those two prices persists because pharmaceutical companies spend enormous sums on direct-to-consumer advertising. They build a manufactured familiarity with a specific name, and that familiarity creates a subtle psychological hesitation around the unfamiliar generic sitting right next to it. Consumers willingly sacrifice thousands of dollars to buy a feeling of safety rather than trusting the chemistry. This psychological flaw of paying a premium for a feeling doesn't disappear when people earn more money. According to the Goldman Sachs 2025 retirement survey, a high income actually provides zero immunity against poor financial mechanics. This pie chart represents households earning over $300,000 a year, roughly the top 5% of American earners. Yet, turning a massive 40% stark red, data reveals nearly half of them live paycheck to paycheck, with no financial cushion. Think of income as a wide hose pouring into a bucket, and your financial mindset as the structural integrity of that bucket. A high income dictates how much water flows, but mindset determines if the bucket has a hole. Expanding the hose dramatically simply pushes more water through faster. If the hole at the bottom expands proportionally to match the new cash flow, the bucket never actually fills, and the household fails to build any lasting wealth. Goldman Sachs researchers attribute this directly to lifestyle creep. It is the macro-level version of the pharmacy trap, a psychological failure to distinguish between actual necessities and the expensive feeling of luxury, which scales violently as a salary climbs. Picture a realistic household whose combined income climbs steadily from $180,000 to $320,000 over several years. As the raises arrive, the lifestyle upgrades to match. They take on a larger mortgage in a more expensive school district. 2 older vehicles are replaced by 2 brand new models, both fully financed rather than bought lightly used. Then the secondary commitments layer in. A country club membership, private lessons for the kids, and endless subscription services quietly attach themselves to the monthly bank statement.
At the time they were made, none of these individual decisions felt reckless. Each upgrade was carefully calibrated to feel proportionate to the new income. Unlike the brand name pharmacy receipt, which hands you a visible, annoying charge every single month, lifestyle creep operates undetected. It never arrives as a single, terrifying bill. Because these upgrades exist as dozens of disconnected, automated monthly payments, a high-earning household can mathematically bleed their take-home pay down to zero while feeling completely responsible. You might hear all this and think, if someone is already wealthy, haven't they earned the right to spend freely? Isn't it a bit joyless to make $300,000 a year and still scrutinize generic drug prices or buy used cars? For the overwhelming majority of people who build substantial, lasting wealth, these choices are never viewed as a temporary diet or a form of deprivation. A strict value per dollar mindset is the exact foundational mechanism that built their wealth in the first place, redirecting money away from purchases that merely buy a feeling. Let's compare two households side by side, both earning the exact same combined income of $150,000. Household A buys new cars, adds extended warranties to appliances, and fills brand name prescriptions. Household B optimizes their choices, buying vehicles 2 to 3 years old, skipping the extended warranties, and opting for the identical generic medications. Looking at this comparison, Household A's income block depletes completely. Household B, by making those unglamorous choices, ends up leaving a highlighted surplus wedge of $4,000 to $7,000 in cash every single year, without earning a single dollar more in salary. When you take that redirected money and project it forward, the line graph arcs aggressively upward over 15 years of reasonable market returns. The end result is a net worth difference exceeding $100,000 between two households pulling in the exact same paychecks. To transition from merely having a high income to actually building substantial, lasting wealth, you have to find those invisible leaks. That requires manually tallying every fixed monthly obligation into one single number and ruthlessly comparing it against your take-home pay.
Society spends decades conditioning us to accept the default settings of our financial lives. We sign the paperwork presented to us, we accept the standard options, and we assume the systems are designed to look out for our best interests. The financial industry relies on this exact behavioral trap, which brings us to the fifth wealth leak in our series, actively managed investment funds. This animation illustrates the mechanical difference between two common paths. According to 2024 industry data, the average actively managed mutual fund charges 0.64% annually in fees, an amount referred to as an expense ratio. Over on the right, a passive index fund tracking the same broad market charges around 0.05%. Because you are never handed a physical bill for the 0.64% fee, it feels insignificant, but it gets quietly subtracted from your entire account balance every single year for as long as you hold the investment. When you map that fee over a real investing timeline, the math becomes staggering. On a standard $100,000 portfolio growing at an assumed 7% return before fees, that roughly 0.6 percentage point gap compounds right alongside your returns. Over 30 years, that tiny, silent deduction carves out a permanent deficit ranging from $30,000 to $126,000, money transferred directly from your retirement to the fund manager. The standard defense for this fee is that you are paying for professional expertise that will beat the market. The actual performance data reveals a different reality. Long-term studies tracking actively managed funds show that over a 10-year period, roughly 78% of them failed to beat their passive benchmark indexes. Stretch that timeline to 20 years and a staggering 94% underperform. You aren't paying extra for a better financial result. In the overwhelming majority of documented cases, you are paying tens of thousands of dollars purely for the feeling of expert management, a feeling that mathematically fails to deliver. That same willingness to accept the default option drives the final two items on our list, paying full retail price and accepting the first medical bill you receive. In both cases, the financial leak happens because a consumer fails to ask a single question. Most shoppers feel an intense psychological discomfort around negotiating. We see a price tag on furniture, a car, or a service contract, and we assume it represents a fixed reality.
Wealthy individuals tend to follow a different pattern. They recognize that a non-fixed price is calibrated for an average, non-negotiating buyer, making it nothing more than an opening offer. Every dollar between that first number and the seller's actual minimum is money sitting on the table, waiting for anyone willing to ask a simple follow-up question. The most extreme example of this inflated default pricing is hidden inside the healthcare system. Hospital billing departments operate on what's known as the charge master rate. This is an internal maximum list price. It exists specifically so insurance companies can negotiate steep discounts on behalf of their members. Yet individuals paying out of pocket frequently receive these charge master rates in the mail and pay them blindly. A patient who receives a $4,000 medical bill can often call the hospital's billing department and ask if they offer a prompt pay discount, a cash rate, or a financial hardship reduction. Because the initial number was calibrated as an opening position rather than a non-negotiable fact, that single phone call routinely wipes out several hundred to well over $1,000 from the final balance. Most people never ask for that reduction.
Quietly accepting the default price on a medical bill, a car, or an investment fund is simply a voluntary tax you agree to pay in order to avoid the temporary emotional discomfort of a 5-second conversation. We have covered 7 specific habits across this masterclass, each exposing a moment where consumers choose comfort over capital. To see the actual stakes of this behavior, we need to view the macroscopic impact of overriding all 7 defaults across an ordinary household's budget. This ledger tracks the physical purchases. By treating slightly used cars as the default rather than new, a household amortizes a savings of roughly $2,000 annually. Skipping extended warranties keeps another $300 in your pocket. Shifting staple household goods to store brand equivalents recovers anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 a year. Then we add the hidden costs. Requesting generic medications saves $1,000 to $2,000 annually for a typical household. On top of that, you recover the eliminated capital retained simply by asking for price flexibility on major purchases. Using highly conservative estimates, consistently applying these choices redirects $5,000 to $10,000 back to the household every single year. Look closely at that figure. Not a single dollar of that $10,000 required asking for a raise, taking on a second job, or increasing your workload. It was salvaged purely by refusing to pay society's built-in premium for feelings over function. Extracting that cash from your budget is only the first step. Salvaged capital does nothing for your net worth if your default behavior is to simply spend the surplus somewhere else. The math only activates when you redirect it into a compounding asset. This curve maps out exactly what happens when you redirect just $6,000 a year of those savings into a low-cost index fund, averaging a historical 7% return. In 20 years, that reclaimed capital grows to over $260,000. Over 30 years, it crosses $600,000. If a household optimizes slightly harder and redirects $10,000 a year, that exact same 30-year timeline produces just over $1 million. This outcome requires absolutely zero additional risk-taking. It requires 0 career changes, 0 business exits, and 0 lucky stock picks. It is the mathematical result of 7 boring, repeatable decisions, compounding quietly in the background of a completely ordinary financial life. Optimizing your existing cash flow is the most accessible and reliable form of wealth building in existence. Knowing the math means nothing if you don't adjust the behavior. To override these defaults starting today, you need a definitive rulebook for implementing these 7 changes without becoming overwhelmed. First, the physical rules. Treat 2 to 3-year-old cars as your automatic default, and brand new models as a rare, highly justified exception. Before buying any warranty, demand the actual failure rate of the product. Pick 3 staple grocery items this week, like canned goods or cleaning supplies, and test the store brand equivalents. Next, the hidden cost rules. Instruct your pharmacist to automatically fill generic equivalents for every prescription. Open your 401k statement and scrutinize any broad market fund charging over 0.5% in fees. Finally, the next time you face a non-fixed price on a major purchase or medical bill, ask one question: is there any flexibility on this price? Every single financial transaction you make from this point forward should pass through one ultimate filter. Ask yourself,
Am I paying for the function of this item, or am I paying for a feeling? Do not attempt to rewire all 7 of these habits simultaneously. Picking one weekly decision, like groceries or medication, and forcing yourself to practice it until it becomes boringly automatic is far more effective than trying everything at once and burning out in a month. Adopting one new habit, mastering it, and letting it run silently in the background is the only durable path to that million-dollar outcome. We have seen the data from the FDA, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and Goldman Sachs. The evidence is clear. Earning a high income will not save you from feeling financially stretched if you maintain a default mindset. Just remember, a wealth preservation mindset is the actual mechanical asset. Your salary is simply the fuel it runs on. Your challenge right now is to pick exactly one item from this masterclass series and apply its action step this week, not next month, this week. True wealth is shaped by treating ordinary decisions with a second look, starting today. If you want more strategies that decode the mechanics of money, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video.